I'd like to get a few questions to put to them. Yes, gentlemen. Yes, you, sir.
Ben, congratulations on Brexit Watch. I think, firstly, it's really important that we hold government to account, and this is a great way of doing it, so thank you very much for doing that. While you've been speaking, I've received an email from Michael Gove. Just arrived, and he says that we are actually going to be leaving the EU courts, we're going to be leaving the EU jurisdictions on customs union, and that is for the whole of the United Kingdom. So he is quite convinced. He was also asking me for a donation, by the way. But he's quite convinced it applies to the whole of the United Kingdom. Now, I know that when it comes to Northern Ireland, there are talks that there has to be a committee set up, and that if this committee isn't set up, then the mechanisms for collecting or inspecting goods going between Northern Ireland and the mainland cannot be put in place, and that there may be ways out of this. So I'd like to ask the remaining members of the panel, how do you square this circle with what Ben is saying, that these things legally have to be rescinded or revoked, and what Boris is saying, and I know that we always trust him and he always tells the truth, how can we be sure that it's going to happen?
Well, it's a huge challenge, because he has, on the 31st of January, signed us up into the Northern Irish Protocol, which is a legally binding international treaty, without any termination provisions, with the exception of Stormont voting to cancel it. And even if Stormont were to cancel it, to vote to cancel it, it would be 2 more years after that before they could get out. And then it would be the joint committee to which you referred that would decide what happened after the 2-year period, how Northern Ireland was dealt with post that 2-year period. And in the absence of agreement, I'm sure you can guess, it is the European Court of Justice that determines what happens to Northern Ireland. So the joint committee is part of an international binding treaty, but if they can't reach an agreement on the future direction of Northern Ireland, then it falls to the European Court of Justice. And so we have to repudiate the Northern Irish Protocol if Michael Gove wants your money.
I mean, Ben's right. The Northern Ireland question has always been a challenge. I mean, I don't need to go over the last 3 years to go over that. But the fact of the matter is, we are now entering this negotiation where this will all be discussed. But one thing I will say is, because of the unique nature of Northern Ireland, there has been a mechanism put in place, and it has been put in place to allow Stormont to make that decision in terms of where they will go in the future. And look, let's be frank about it. My personal view on this is there will have to be some sort of understanding as to how we deal with Northern Ireland, and we will have to have a mandate from Stormont to be able to find that compromise. But I'm much more optimistic, as I said, than Ben in terms of what we can achieve. And will we be free from the ECJ? I'm firmly of the belief that we will be.
Can I just say I'm not pessimistic.
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic, but we need to be a self-confident, independent nation, and the government needs the political will and self-confidence to do the right thing, which is to repudiate the treaty. I'm not pessimistic. I'm just saying that's what we need to do.
Now, let me just say here on these issues that when Boris came back with his agreement, I was quite critical of it, and I put my reasons on the Bruges Group website, one of which was the border in the Irish Sea, that I didn't believe, like many of our democratic unionist supporters that have come and addressed the Bruges route, that was an appropriate mechanism. And there are a number of issues. I wasn't happy about the 40 billion. Now, since then, we've had a general election. The Brexit Party didn't oppose the Conservatives. It didn't stand in any seat that was held by a Conservative member. But we are going forward, and Boris has made further moves in the right direction. But as we've heard, there's more to do. And I know, for instance, that Marc Francois is fully aware of these issues as well. He had the same sort of reservations at the time that I have referred to. So there's much more work to be done. And I also said earlier, I single out the appointment of Suella Braverman. I said that was a brilliant appointment.
Hear, hear.
Absolutely brilliant appointment, and she's the Attorney General. She's spoken to you in the Bruges group. She's a very, very bright person. She's a very, very committed Brexiteer. So this is going to be one of the issues that Suella is going to be working on. But I agree, much more remains to be done to ensure that eventually Britain gets the best deal and that we are a free country taking advantage of all the opportunities in the world. Thank you. So,
first of all, what a great bunch of speakers you've got together today. Thank you, the Bruges Group, and particularly for you two guys who spoke so well and you're on the last knockings. I'm going to direct my question to you, Ben, or see whether you agree with me, that a lot is spoken about the North and the Midlands, people lending their votes to the Conservatives when they normally vote Labour. I would also say, and I hope you agree with me, there are a lot of followers of your party that lent their vote to the Conservatives, and I think that's an important point.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's very good of you to acknowledge that. You know, we did stand down in 317 seats against the Conservative Party, and I'm sure that that was a really significant constituent reason for the Conservatives getting the thumping majority they got. I think, you know, just very briefly, Boris has now got an 80-seat majority, so he can pretty much do what he likes. But what is interesting, I think, of that's come out of the last 3 years is that people are much more promiscuous with their voting than they used to be. And you might think that an 80-seat majority will see you good for 10 years, but if he lets down that red wall, if he lets down the fishermen, if he lets down people like me, I voted Tory all my life until I could take no more of Mrs. May. And if he continues to let down people like us, that 80 majority will go.
We all know the importance of winning the PR war. Why isn't the Conservative government winning the PR war at the moment against the media? Because in my view, they're very flat-footed.
BBC.
I was of the view after the referendum, we during the campaign, whichever group you were part of on the Leave side, we ran a strong PR campaign, right? And over the last 3 years, what I felt, and I've said this at the highest level, I said actually the truth of the matter is we thought we'd won the war, but in fact we'd won the battle. And actually it gave the likes of Chuckram and Chris Bryan, all those other guys, to kind of go in there and undermine what it meant to leave the European Union, and we ended up playing this debate over the last 3 years. The fact of the matter is, and the gentleman who referred to the lending of the votes, I mean, what's really clear, certainly in my intake, is the diversity of the candidates. And I'm not talking about, I'm talking specifically about all the variety of careers, the experiences, where they all come from. And it is simply, it is just the truth that we've been lent these votes, and we have to deliver on, it is true that we have to deliver on the NHS and policing and all that, but actually also on what's been promised, and we have to take that completely forward. In terms of the PR media, now for me it's the time to get things done, right? So on 31st Jan, my first act that went through was the EU withdrawal agreement. It was a great honour for me to be able to, 3 years ago, if you asked me would I be in Parliament voting on it, my first ever vote, and getting the first act through, we have to do that. But we are now at that negotiation phase, and I would actually argue we've actually done a lot as a party in terms of the withdrawal acts that's gone through. We've got the agricultural bill going through, we've got the environmental bill going through. In the midst of all that, we've had things like Corona come up and things like that. So the government's been immensely busy, but we're at the doing stage. Of course, the media has some things to answer for, I think, in the way they've handled this. Dare I say Channel 4, for example. But actually, I would argue that actually now is the time to do stuff, and we can, the PR will run a lot alongside it.
Thank you. Next question, please. Yes, there's a lady right at the back.
there, Ben. A question about the EU. You mentioned about the EU's astonishing levels of debt. So I'd like to ask you about the Target 2 debt. I understand that Italy and Spain owe about 1 trillion in Target 2 debt. How do you think that's going to be ever settled? And secondly, the EU is currently trying to agree on its next 7-year budget. And I understand that's not going too well because the richer countries don't want to, they're squabbling with the poorer countries because of the financial black hole caused by the UK
Brexit,
leaving
yeah.
the EU. How do you think that's going to get resolved? Because if it isn't, the EU is going to be essentially stuck with not being able to proceed with its plans.
Well, yeah, very good question. Target 2 is something I didn't touch on, but it's the clearing system for the Eurozone interbank system, and it should really clear to nil at the end of each day, but it doesn't. As you said, there's an overhang of around 1 trillion, and that basically means that banks can't clear their debts, and that basically means that the European Union, as I exemplified in another way, is financially bust. And I don't think I'm being sensationalist. I think there is a mother of all credit crunches about to unfold in the European Union. They're 10 years into an asset growth bubble, and yet interest rates are still in negative territory. Their economies are on their back. Germany is teetering on recession. Italy is in recession. Greece is in recession. France is basically in recession. Now they've got coronavirus to deal with. I think the issues are mounting up and something is going to give. I think it's deeply dangerous. We should be insulating ourselves from the European Union.
Yes. Sorry, there's a gentleman over there that hasn't asked a question today. Let's go for him.
Good evening. I would like to ask, please, what are the legal implications of repudiating Boris's so-called agreement?
Well, that is a very, very good question. One of the reasons I knew things weren't right with our negotiations under Mrs. May was because I had been a Tory party donor, and that entitled me to have lunch once a month with cabinet ministers in a small group of people. And every meeting I went to, I asked 2 questions of the cabinet minister who was there. First is, what's your no-deal planning? And the answer always was, we don't need no-deal planning because we're going to get the deal we want. Deeply unsettling answer. And then the other question I used to ask was your question, which is, why don't we just sign up to this wretched deal and repudiate it? And the British government never repudiates a treaty. Well, I can't imagine we've gone through 400 years of the empire without breaching an international agreement. And what we need is the political will to do it. We need to be more Trumpian in our approach. When he wanted to renegotiate NAFTA, he just said, we're renegotiating NAFTA, and that was it.
I'm looking for anybody that's not asked a question yet today. I think the gentleman at the back there hasn't asked a question. Yes, you in the, that's it. Thank you.
You take this.
Good evening, panel. Thank you very much for those great presentations from everybody today. My question is this. Good intentions aside, and the world is peopled by people with good intentions, how much can we trust our negotiating team to do an honest job of work with these bureaucrats in Brussels? How many members of the European negotiating team from our side are former bureaucrats? Any ideas, any suggestions, any thoughts?
Do you know, I don't know the answer to that, but I will say, obviously I will say you can trust us a lot. But what I will say is this, actually. We have, it comes back to that lending of the votes argument. We've seen what happens if you don't deliver on the democratic mandate that's been given to you, right? And so I'm firmly of the view that we have to deliver on that mandate that was given to us in 2016. Actually, we saw it in the European elections, that there was a backlash and people did feel that their votes weren't being listened to, and then we've seen it again in December. So I think the government is very, very clear that they have to deal with it. The Prime Minister's been very, very clear. So I think we have to give them some leeway. I was with some farmers the other day, and they were asking me about this. I said, actually, what I would say is hold your nerve, because we are in a negotiation. You will hear things. The PR war will be fought over the next 12 months. We cannot allow for what's happened over the last 3 years, where everything was being fought in the PR war, and the negotiation was being influenced. We have to be allowed to have that negotiation, have the space to deliver that, answer the tough questions like what's going to happen in Northern Ireland, answer the tough questions about what our relationship with the European Union is going to look like, because actually it will go right to the fabric of what we are as a nation, how we are going to position ourselves in the rest of the world. And parallel to that, the reason I talked about the US deal, actually, it's good that we have that, because it maximises our leverage with the Europeans and with the Americans. And actually, everyone said we wouldn't have the sway if we left the EU. Well, I say both those negotiations will prove that actually we do have that sway on the global stage.
Thank you. And I'm going to give you a second question for the day. And I think this is going to be our very last question.
All right.
Could you make it clear and concise?
Yes. You mentioned EU debt and a liability that Britain has that we've signed up to. I'm wondering if that's called into play, where can that money come from? I did hear talk about all sorts of strange things, such as taking money from our bank accounts without our permission. Do you have some ideas on that, where it could come from? Could we borrow it?
Well, we would have to pay it into the EIB. It would be a restructuring of the European Investment Bank to bail it out in any, like any other banking bailout.
Where would the money come from?
Well, we would have to borrow it. It would be a liability for our taxpayers. It would be a burden for the United Kingdom. What we must hope is that the other members of the EIB all pay up their fair share. But of course, they're the ones who are going to be causing the trouble, and we're going to be on the periphery of it. So it's not good. The other thing we should do is repudiate that guarantee. Which we won't.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, just on the EIB, you may remember the Bruges Group produced a report on this about 5 or 6 years ago, highlighted just these problems. And unfortunately, we've still got that liability out there. I'm probably not quite as gloomy as Ben about the world.
I'm so optimistic.
I'm not as gloomy as Ben about the world economic outlook.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's fair enough. Fair point.
Okay. There are obviously going to be, as I said at the very beginning this morning, there are going to be some problems over the next 6 months ago, quite serious ones, and I urge the government to have a bold budget next week and do everything it can to generate growth in this country.
Hear, hear.
Have to go on. It's going to have to go on here, it's going to have to go on in the United States, and it's also going to have to go on in the EU. And most of these governments, we don't like them, but they don't want to be chucked out, and they are going to, in those famous words, do whatever it takes. So I don't see Armageddon around the corner, but there are certainly a lot of issues that have to be tackled, and there is a massive agenda out there, and the agenda that the UK follows. Yeah, Boris has been a very good politician and electioneering. I agree. But there's now got to be an awful lot of work on substance, and there's got to be a lot of work on making sure that we have an effective private enterprise economy in this country. I talked about the 1980s this morning. If we don't get back to those sort of attitudes, and we don't make the private sector and the growth of the private sector the highest priority, life is going to be more and more difficult. So the mentality of the Conservative Party is not the same as it was 30 years ago. We've been down all sorts of sidetracks. We've been down Osborne, Cameron, all sorts of nonsense. But now we actually have to get free market capitalism to the fore again, effective tax policies, control of the public sector, and making sure that people have more money in their own pockets.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. We've had a great conference, great speakers, and much more remains to be done.